Standing in that grocery store checkout line with my last $20, I knew I was making a choice between eating lunch for the rest of the week or buying something special for my brother's birthday. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I clutched the pizza and store-bought cake, thinking about how Marcus would smile when he saw what I brought. Family has always meant everything to me, even when it meant sacrificing for people who maybe did not deserve it. Little did I know that night would teach me the most painful lesson about self-worth I would ever learn. Before I tell you what happened that night that changed everything between us, I would love to know where you are watching from. Drop a comment below and hit that subscribe button, because this story is about to show you how sometimes the people closest to us can hurt us the deepest. The apartment I called home was a tiny studio on the wrong side of downtown, where the rent was cheap enough for someone juggling 2 part-time jobs just to stay afloat. Every morning, I woke up on my pull-out couch that doubled as my bed, surrounded by the organized chaos of a life that had been turned upside down 6 months earlier. That was when the marketing company I worked for decided to downsize, and suddenly my comfortable salary and benefits package disappeared overnight. Now, my days started at 5:30 in the morning, walking dogs for busy professionals who could afford services I once took for granted. Golden retrievers and French bulldogs became my morning companions as I navigated the tree-lined streets of neighborhoods where people like me used to live. The irony was not lost on me that I was caring for pets that probably ate better than I did most days. By 10 in the morning, I would trade my walking shoes for a server's apron at Danny's Diner, a place where the coffee was always fresh, and the customers were a mix of construction workers, office employees, and people like me who were just trying to make ends meet. The work was honest, and my manager Sarah understood when I had to leave early for dog walking appointments. She had been in my shoes before working multiple jobs to support her family after her divorce. My relationship with money had become a careful dance of calculations and sacrifices. Every dollar had a purpose. Every purchase required consideration. I kept a small notebook where I tracked expenses down to the penny, because when you are living paycheck to paycheck, even a cup of coffee can throw off your budget for the week. The notebook lived in my purse alongside a small stack of coupons I had cut from newspapers I found at the diner. Marcus had always been different from me. 3 years younger, he possessed a confidence I had never quite managed to develop. While I struggled through community college and eventually landed my first job through sheer persistence, he had sailed through university with a computer science degree and immediately found work at a tech startup downtown. His apartment was in one of those modern buildings with floor-to-ceiling windows and a doorman, the kind of place I used to dream about living in someday. We had grown up in the same house with the same parents, but somewhere along the way, our paths had diverged dramatically. After our parents divorced when I was 22 and Marcus was 19, I had tried to be the glue that held our small family together. I organized birthday dinners, holiday gatherings, and made sure everyone stayed in touch. Marcus seemed to appreciate these efforts, though he rarely initiated contact himself. The call about his birthday party had come 3 days earlier. He had mentioned it casually, almost as an afterthought, while I was walking Mrs. Patterson's poodle through the park near his building. "Jessica is throwing me a little something this Saturday." He had said, his voice carrying that tone he used when he was trying to sound modest about something he was actually excited about. "Just a few friends, nothing big. You should come by if you want." The invitation felt lukewarm at best, but I had learned not to expect enthusiasm from Marcus when it came to family events. He had always been more focused on his social circle, the young professionals he worked with, and the lifestyle they all seemed to share. Still, he was my brother, and the thought of missing his birthday felt wrong. Standing in that grocery store, I had calculated exactly how much I could spend without compromising my ability to pay rent. $20 was my absolute limit, which meant I could afford either a decent pizza and nothing else or a cake and some chips. The pizza seemed more practical, since it would actually feed people, and I could grab a small cake from the bakery section that was marked down because it was nearing its sell-by date. The cashier, a teenage girl with bright pink highlights, rang up my items with the efficient boredom of someone who had processed thousands of similar transactions. As I handed over my crumpled bills, I felt a familiar pang of embarrassment about my financial situation, followed immediately by a wave of determination. This was about showing up for family, about maintaining the connections that mattered most. The drive to Jessica's apartment building took me through parts of the city I rarely visited anymore, where restaurants had valet parking and people wore clothes that cost more than I made in a week. Marcus had been dating Jessica for about 8 months, and from what little he had shared, she worked in marketing for a pharmaceutical company and lived in a converted loft in the arts district. The building Jessica lived in was the kind of place that made me immediately aware of my worn sneakers and discount store jeans. A uniformed doorman sat behind a marble desk in the lobby which featured modern art that probably cost more than my annual salary. As I waited for the elevator carrying my grocery store bags, I caught my reflection in the polished chrome doors and tried to smooth down my hair, which never quite cooperated no matter what I did to it. The elevator ride to the 8th floor gave me time to rehearse what I would say when I saw Marcus. I wanted to sound upbeat and confident like someone who was doing well, despite the obvious evidence to the contrary. The doors opened to reveal a hallway with exposed brick walls and industrial lighting that managed to look both edgy and expensive. Jessica's apartment door was slightly ajar, and I could hear music and laughter spilling into the hallway. I knocked gently and waited, suddenly conscious of the grocery bags in my hands and wishing I had thought to transfer the food to something that looked less obviously cheap. "Oh, you must be Talia." Jessica appeared in the doorway, and I was struck by how perfectly put together she looked. Her dark hair fell in loose waves that had clearly been professionally styled, and her outfit looked effortless in the way that only expensive clothes can manage. "Marcus mentioned you might stop by. Come on in." The apartment was stunning in a way that made me understand why Marcus had been so eager to spend time here. The main living area featured soaring ceilings, exposed beams, and windows that offered a view of the city skyline. About 15 people were scattered around the space, most of them holding wine glasses, and engaged in animated conversations about topics I could not quite catch from the doorway. I spotted Marcus near the kitchen island, wearing a button-down shirt I had never seen before, and laughing at something a tall blonde woman was saying. He looked relaxed and confident in a way that reminded me of how different our lives had become. When he saw me, his expression shifted slightly, the easy smile becoming something more restrained. "Talia, you made it." He approached and gave me a brief hug that felt more obligatory than warm. "Let me introduce you to everyone." The introductions became a blur of names and job titles that all seemed to involve words like senior, director, and executive. There was Brandon, who worked in venture capital, Stephanie, a marketing director at a Fortune 500 company, and David, who had just launched his own consulting firm. Each person smiled politely and asked what I did for work, and each time I explained my current situation, I watched their expressions shift from interest to something that looked uncomfortably like pity. "That must be really challenging," said Amanda, a woman about my age, who worked in pharmaceutical sales. "Are you looking for something more permanent, or do you prefer the flexibility of freelance work?" The question was well-meaning, but it highlighted the gap between my reality and theirs. These were people who chose flexibility because they had options, not because it was the only way to pay rent. "I am definitely looking for something full-time," I replied, trying to keep my voice upbeat. "The job market has been pretty competitive lately." "Oh, absolutely," agreed Brandon, though something in his tone suggested he had never actually experienced a competitive job market himself. "My company is always looking for good people, though most of our positions require pretty specific experience." I nodded and smiled, recognizing the polite dismissal for what it was. These people existed in a world where networking meant connecting with others who had already achieved success, not extending ladders to those still climbing. Jessica took the grocery bags from my hands with a smile that seemed genuine enough. "You brought food? That's so thoughtful." She opened the bags and examined the contents, her expression remaining carefully neutral as she pulled out the pizza and cake. "Store-bought cake. Sometimes that's exactly what a party needs." The comment felt like a small knife delivered with such sweetness that it took me a moment to recognize the condescension beneath it. I watched as she placed the pizza on the counter next to an elaborate spread of catered appetizers that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. As the evening progressed, I found myself drifting between conversations, trying to find common ground with people whose experiences seemed so far removed from my own. They talked about weekend trips to wine country restaurants I could never afford to visit, and career moves that involved choosing between multiple lucrative offers. I contributed where I could, but increasingly I felt like an observer rather than a participant. The worst part was watching Marcus. In this environment, surrounded by these people, he seemed to transform into someone I barely recognized. He was more animated, more confident, more dismissive of anything that did not fit into this polished world he had created for himself. When someone asked about his family, he mentioned our parents briefly, but somehow managed to avoid talking about me entirely, even though I was standing right there. The conversation that would change everything started innocuously enough. A group had gathered near the windows where the city lights created a backdrop that looked like something from a movie. Someone had brought up travel plans, and suddenly everyone was comparing notes about upcoming vacations to places like Costa Rica, Iceland, and Japan. "Marcus, weren't you saying something about Hawaii?" asked Stephanie, the marketing director with the perfect teeth and designer handbag. "That sounds absolutely divine." Marcus's face lit up in a way I had not seen all evening. "Jessica and I are going to Maui next month. We found this incredible resort right on the beach. I cannot wait to just disconnect from everything for a week." "That sounds amazing," said David. "There's nothing like a good vacation to reset your perspective. I just got back from Tuscany and I swear I'm a completely different person." The group laughed appreciatively, and I found myself calculating how many months of my current income it would take to afford a trip like that. The answer was depressing enough that I pushed it out of my mind. "You should totally bring family next time," suggested Amanda. "Make it a real celebration." The suggestion hung in the air for a moment, and I felt the attention of the group shift slightly in my direction. Marcus's expression became carefully blank, and I recognized the look of someone trying to figure out how to navigate an uncomfortable social situation. "Well," Marcus said slowly, his voice taking on a tone I had never heard before, "maybe when everyone in the family can actually afford their own vacation." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my face flush hot, and for a moment I could not quite process what had just happened. My own brother had just publicly humiliated me in front of a room full of strangers, using my financial struggles as a punchline for his own social comfort. The group's laughter was immediate and brutal, not the uncomfortable chuckles of people who recognized an awkward moment, but genuine amusement at what they apparently saw as clever humor. Brandon actually slapped Marcus on the back as if he had delivered the joke of the evening. "Ouch," said David, grinning widely. "That is harsh, dude." I stood there feeling exposed and small, wondering how the person I had sacrificed lunch money for could look at me with such casual cruelty. But what happened next was somehow even worse. Marcus was standing by the food table, casually reaching for another slice of the pizza I had bought with my last $20. He took a large bite, chewed thoughtfully, and then turned back to his audience with the confidence of someone who knew he had their complete attention. "You know what is funny," he said, and I knew with terrible certainty that whatever came next would destroy something between us that could never be repaired. "Even homeless people have more worth than you." The silence that followed lasted maybe 3 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. I watched his face as he delivered the words, saw the slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth, the way his eyes sparkled with what looked uncomfortably like pleasure. Then the room erupted in laughter that seemed to echo off the exposed brick walls and soaring ceilings. Jessica covered her mouth with her hand, her shoulders shaking with suppressed giggles. Brandon was actually wiping tears from his eyes. Even Amanda, who had seemed the most sympathetic earlier, was laughing behind her wineglass. The sound surrounded me like a physical force pressing in from all sides until I felt like I might suffocate. In that moment, something fundamental shifted inside me. Not the hot rush of anger I might have expected, but something colder and more final. I felt myself detached from the scene as if I were watching it happen to someone else. The laughter became distant. The faces around me blurred into a collection of open mouths and bright eyes. I looked at Marcus one more time, this person I had shared a childhood with, who had called me when he was lonely his first year of college, who had asked me to help him move into his first apartment. He was still chewing the pizza I had bought for him, still basking in the approval of people who would probably forget his name within a year. I picked up my purse from the chair where I had left it, checking automatically for my keys and phone. My hands were steady, which surprised me. I felt eerily calm, like someone who had just made an important decision without fully realizing it. "Happy birthday, Marcus," I said quietly, my voice cutting through the laughter with unexpected clarity. Then I walked toward the door, my footsteps silent on the polished concrete floors. Behind me, the conversation was already moving on to something else, my departure apparently as unremarkable as my presence had been. I pressed the button for the elevator and waited, listening to the muffled sounds of the party continuing without me. The elevator doors closed with a soft whisper, and suddenly I was alone with my reflection in the chrome surfaces. I looked exactly the same as I had an hour earlier, but something essential had changed. The person looking back at me was someone who had finally learned a truth I should have recognized much sooner. The first week after Marcus's party passed in a strange bubble of numbness. I went through the motions of my daily routine, walking dogs in the morning and serving coffee and eggs at the diner, but it felt like I was watching someone else live my life. My phone remained silent, which told me everything I needed to know about my brother's priorities. He had not called to apologize or even to check if I had made it home safely that night. I found myself replaying the evening, obsessively analyzing every detail, trying to understand how someone I had loved unconditionally could treat me with such casual cruelty. The words, "Even homeless people have more worth than you," echoed in my head at random moments throughout the day, usually when I was least prepared to deal with them. But something unexpected began to happen around the second week. Instead of falling deeper into hurt and self-pity, I started to feel something else entirely, a quiet kind of anger that was focused and purposeful rather than destructive. For the first time in months, maybe years, I began to see my situation clearly, without the filter of family obligation and misplaced loyalty. I started paying attention to the small victories in my daily life that I had been overlooking. Mrs. Patterson, whose poodle I walked every morning, had begun leaving little notes with my payment, telling me how much happier her dog seemed since I started caring for him. My co-workers at the diner had started including me in their after-work gatherings, treating me like a valued member of their team, rather than someone just passing through. One evening, while organizing my small apartment, I found the notebook where I tracked my expenses and realized something remarkable. I had been managing to save a small amount each month, even with my limited income. It was not much, maybe $30 or $40, but it represented something important about my ability to survive and adapt. I decided to use that money differently. Instead of hoarding it for emergencies, I enrolled in an online marketing course that I could complete during my downtime at the diner. The instructor was a woman named Carol, who had built her own successful consulting business from scratch, and her story resonated with me in ways I had not expected. "The most successful people I know," Carol said in one of her video lectures, "are not the ones who never fell down. They are the ones who learn to get up, dust themselves off, and keep moving forward with purpose." As I worked through the coursework, I began to remember parts of myself that I had forgotten existed. Before my corporate job had ended, I had actually been good at marketing. I understood how to connect with audiences, how to tell stories that resonated with people, how to build campaigns that generated real results. Those skills had not disappeared when I lost my job. I had simply stopped believing in them. Meanwhile, Marcus's life was taking a decidedly different trajectory, though I only learned about this through our mother, who called me every few weeks to check in. She mentioned almost casually that Marcus's startup was having financial difficulties and that several employees had been laid off. "I think he is pretty stressed about it," she said during one of our conversations. "You know how he gets when things are not going according to plan." I did know, actually. Marcus had always been someone who derived his sense of self-worth from external validation and material success. When those things were threatened, he tended to lash out at the people closest to him, as if somehow their problems were the cause of his own difficulties. A month after the party, I was working a slow Tuesday shift at the diner when my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. When I opened it, I found a long, rambling message from Marcus that had clearly been written and rewritten multiple times. The tone was a mixture of desperation and carefully crafted manipulation that I recognized from our childhood. He explained that he had lost his job when the startup folded, that Jessica had ended their relationship when his financial situation became unstable, and that he was struggling to pay rent on his expensive apartment. He wanted to meet for coffee to talk about everything that had happened and to figure out how to move forward as a family. I read the message 3 times, waiting for the familiar tug of sympathy and responsibility that would have compelled me to drop everything and rush to help him. Instead, I felt something that surprised me, absolutely nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, not even pity. Just a calm recognition that his problems were no longer my problems to solve. I deleted the message without responding and went back to work. 2 weeks later, Marcus showed up at my apartment building on a Saturday morning looking like someone who had not slept well in days. His expensive clothes were wrinkled, his hair uncombed, and his eyes had the desperate look of someone who had run out of options. "Talia," he said, when I opened my door, his voice cracking slightly. "We need to talk." I looked at him for a long moment, this person who had once been the most important relationship in my life. He looked smaller, somehow diminished in a way that went beyond his obvious financial troubles. The confidence and arrogance that had seemed so natural to him at Jessica's party had completely evaporated. "Okay," I said finally. "We can talk." I let him into my small studio apartment, acutely aware of how different it must seem to him now that his own circumstances had changed. He sat heavily on my pull-out couch and looked around at the organized simplicity of my life, with something that might have been envy. "I know I messed up." He began, his words tumbling over each other in a rush. "What I said at the party, it was horrible. I was trying to impress people who do not even matter, and I hurt the one person who has always been there for me. I have been thinking about it every day since it happened." He paused, waiting for me to respond, but I remained silent. I had learned the value of listening carefully before speaking, especially when the stakes were high. "I lost my job," he continued, his voice getting smaller. "The whole company went under, and Jessica decided she did not want to be with someone who was not financially stable. I guess I finally understand what it feels like to have people judge you based on your bank account." The irony was so thick I could practically taste it, but I still said nothing. Marcus shifted uncomfortably under my steady gaze, clearly expecting some kind of reaction. "I know I cannot take back what I said," he went on, "but I want to try to make things right between us. You are my sister and I love you, and I was an idiot who let other people's opinions matter more than family." Finally, I spoke. "What exactly are you asking me for, Marcus?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. "I do not know. Forgiveness. A chance to prove I can be better. Maybe just the opportunity to have my sister back in my life." I considered his words carefully. There was something different about him now, a humility that I had never seen before. But I had also learned not to confuse desperation with genuine change. "I accept your apology," I said slowly, "and I believe you are sorry about what happened. But forgiveness is not the same thing as forgetting, and it does not mean everything goes back to the way it was before." Marcus nodded eagerly, relief flooding his face. "Of course. I understand completely." "I do not think you do," I said gently but firmly. "What you said to me that night was not just cruel, it was revealing. It showed me how you really see me, how you think about people who are struggling. That is not something that changes overnight just because your circumstances have shifted." The relief faded from his expression, replaced by something that looked like genuine confusion. "But I told you I was sorry. I explained why it happened." "Being sorry is the beginning," I said. "But if you want any kind of relationship with me going forward, you are going to have to prove that you have actually learned something from this experience. Not just about treating me with respect, but about treating everyone with respect regardless of their situation." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street where I had learned to find contentment in a simpler life. I spent years trying to keep our family connected, making excuses for behavior that was unacceptable, prioritizing your comfort over my own dignity. I am not going to do that anymore. When I turned back to face him, Marcus was staring at me with an expression I had never seen before. It took me a moment to recognize what it was: respect. "I want to try," he said quietly. "I want to be the kind of person who deserves to have you as a sister." "Then start by figuring out who you are when no one is watching," I replied. "When there is no audience to impress, no social status to maintain, no external validation to chase. Figure out what kind of person you want to be, and then be that person consistently." Marcus left that afternoon with a promise to stay in touch, but more importantly, with a clear understanding that our relationship would be built on different terms going forward. I would not be the sister who sacrificed herself for his comfort, and he could not be the brother who took that sacrifice for granted. Over the following month, something beautiful happened. Freed from the emotional drain of trying to maintain a one-sided relationship, I found energy I had forgotten I possessed. My online marketing course led to freelance opportunities, which eventually led to a full-time position with a non-profit organization that helped people transitioning out of homelessness find stable employment. The irony of that particular career path was not lost on me, given Marcus's comment about homeless people having more worth than me. But instead of bitterness, I felt a deep sense of purpose in work that allowed me to help people rebuild their lives and recognize their own value regardless of their circumstances. Marcus and I maintained contact, but it was different now. Our conversations were more honest, more equal, more respectful. He found work with a smaller company that paid less than his startup job, but offered more stability and a healthier work environment. More importantly, he seemed to be developing relationships based on genuine connection rather than social positioning. Sometimes the people we love most teach us the hardest lessons about self-worth, and maybe that is exactly what we need to become, who we are meant to be. What is the most important relationship lesson you have learned in your own life? Have you ever had to set boundaries with someone you love in order to protect your own well-being? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming life's challenges. Remember to share this with anyone who might need to hear that their worth is not determined by what others think of them. Thank you for listening, and remember that you are valuable exactly as you are.